Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, how do you prepare for inflation? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If you got a question for me, I want to invite you to go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. Once you get to the site, there's a link at the top of the front page. It says Ask Prudent Money. Just send your questions in. We'll get you taken care of. That easy. And we do answer those questions when they come in. In fact, that's why we ask for you to put your phone number down there, because if we don't get an answer that you've connected with us, we like to call and leave a message and make sure that you do get whatever question that you have answered. We take it very seriously. So that's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. I was talking a little bit about inflation in the opener there. And the question is, how do you prepare for inflation? And, as we discussed yesterday, there is so much confusion as to really where we are headed from an economic standpoint. But I think what people forget is that there's a ton of different components that make up what's going to look like inflation or not, or look like something else. But the main component is the tariffs. And I think you've got to be realistic about the potential the potential havoc that they wreak on the economy. The tariffs are something that are so far from being resolved, and that's the first thing that you got to know is that there's a lot of numbers flying around, but there's not much being done about solving the tariff issue. And so when you get into this situation and you've got Walmart that says we're going to pass they are probably one of the biggest stores in retail, and you're going to have them pass on the expenses of the tariff, you get kind of a problem. And so a lot of other retailers will look at Walmart as well. Like I said yesterday, I think Target saying that they were going to eat the expenses, I think they've got bigger issues than the tariffs. So they're probably trying to mix all those losses in together. And so it's just no big deal. But I think Walmart's what you want to watch. And they say, no way, we're passing them on. So there's a lot of confusion as to what's really going on, and the truth is that these trade deals between countries, excuse me, take 2 to 3 years to work themselves out through negotiations and all kinds of things, and the administration is setting it up to where they're going to get these done quickly. And I just don't think the system is built for quickly. That's why you can't control inflation, personal inflation, what prices are doing, but you can control your actions towards inflation. And that's what we want to open up with today. So how do we protect ourselves from it? Start out by, if you have not done this yet, and I don't think it's too late to start, because it's something that you want to be doing anyway. If you have not created an emergency fund, then that's the first place that I would start. And it might be a situation where you really haven't created one, and it's not going to do you much good, or you feel like it's not going to do you much good creating one. I think that the process of going through the habit of making that a priority is important. and anything that you can start to put back. It may be that inflation doesn't settle in and start to make a difference for another couple of months, or it may be a month, but you can at least save something and start the habit of that. Number two, the most important thing that you can do is go through your spending. You know, I'm not a big budget person. I'm more about a spending plan, planning out your spending. And if you look at it from the standpoint of a plan A versus plan B, which we talk about a lot with investments, plan A spending strategy is simply what you do all the time. You know, cut things out, you make it work. It's what you're used to, it's what you're accustomed to. A plan B isn't like that. It's you start going through every detail. And I think that, well, let me stop there and say this. I think that there's a tendency, because you don't really particularly want to do this. You don't want to deal with the figures, the facts, the numbers. I mean, I see this all the time. And you kind of skim over things or look at things from a broad standpoint, or you kind of do a little bit with your spending plan, and then you put it away. Then, I mean, get serious about getting into those numbers and start to cut out what you can cut out, and that you can maybe change a few things to save some money. Whatever you can do, it's going to help. And what I would do is I would start right into the Plan B spending strategy and take that money and put it over into your emergency fund to help build it. Now, one thing that you can do, and I would imagine that this flies in the face of pop culture finance, but I would even question as to if you get into a scenario to where we have not just horrible but bad inflation, that you cut back on some of your saving and use some of that money to offset the difference. I think you got to really be intentional about this and plan. Not to say that you stop for good. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. But make it to where if you have to go into Plan B spending, that Plan A spending, this is what you do to change it, and you get it changed, and it's quick and it's easy. But remember, obviously, you can't do anything about inflation, but you can control your actions. And it's also, I believe it's a very good conversation to have with your kids as to, hey, things may be a little bit different. We may not be doing some of the things we always do. We may be cutting back. We may not be eating out as much, and that sort of thing. And they can really learn quite a bit going through this process. Especially, I think it gives them confidence to let them know what you're doing and why you're doing it. But just a few things to think about. Second question that has come in, it says, I have extra cash each month. Should I invest, save for a house, or pay off debt? And the question really comes down to, three very important stewardship habits. But it comes down to what do you value? If you went through your debit card statements, your American Express, your Visa, and you wrote down everything that you spent, and you added it up, and you put it into categories. So, like, for instance, your house cost you these 5 or 6 expenses. You add them up under under the label or category of a house. At the grocery store, you add up how much you spend there. Eating out, you add up and put that number there. That's usually a bigger one than people think. And you look at it, you could literally rank them from 1 to 15 or 20, and you can see what you value the most, because where we value is where the money goes every single time. And so that's the first thing I would do. What is most important? Is it investing? Do I value that more? Or is it to save for a house? or is it to pay off debt? And that's the first. If you're truly stuck, which one is the most important? That's the way I would go about the process. Now, if you're in a situation where you are up to recommendations, I would say, saving for a house would probably be last on my list. And then investing would probably be second, and then pay off debt would be first. It's funny. Pop Culture Finance talks about how important it is to start investing at an early age. And I get that. Don't disagree with that. That's important. But if you're sitting there with debt, why wouldn't it make sense to go and pay that debt off, to continue to pay down on that debt? It's a long process, but the whole idea is to make progress and continue to do so over time until you get it paid off. So, in my opinion, the response to, well, if you the earlier you start off, the better that you are, and you can run the numbers. The numbers are not rocket science. That's what they do show. Having said that, I still think it's important to get past the debt and pay the debt off as quickly as you can, and it'll teach you a lot of things about how you're spending money and how you can be a better steward of what God has given you. And also, don't forget that debt, the interest that you're paying on that debt is probably pretty high, and that's just throwing money away. So really, give it some thought from the value standpoint. I would prefer that people value paying off debt, and obviously we're actually gonna cover the saving for a house question on the other side of the break. But something else has been really tough for people to get that first house. This is Bob Brooks. You are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
The privileges of divine adoption go far beyond what most Christians realize. Friday on The Verdict, Pastor John Monroe continues exploring our relationship with God as Father. It includes discipline, unlimited access, and an eternal inheritance. Discover the joy of trusting a Father who gives good gifts to his children. Friday on The Verdict.
The Verdict, weekday mornings at 10:30, here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
Dynamic, practical, life-changing.
There's no point in going to church and not letting the Christ who gave birth to the church on the day of Pentecost change your life.
Join us each day as Pastor Paul Shepherd applies the timeless truth of Scripture to everyday life. It's Destined for Victory on this great station.
Weekday afternoons at 3:30, here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If you got a question for me, I want to invite you to the website, prudentmoney.com. There is a link at the top of the page. Just click through it and send a question. We do answer those questions for you. They don't go in a big dark hole, never to be seen again. So if you've ever sent in a question, you didn't get an answer, please get in touch with us. Let us know, because the whole spam thing, not always something I can control. In fact, I don't know if I can ever control it. I wish I could stop it, but it still happens. So give us a call. Let us know. We'll get you squared away. That's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. One of the problems with the environment that we're dealing with today, high interest rates, debt, high property valuations, houses have gone up in price, obviously, is that first time home buyer is being kind of squeezed out of the opportunity of buying that first home. And I think there's a couple things that you got to kind of change the way you think when it comes to what do I have to do to get into a home. Maybe you've been living in an apartment, your family is growing, you're running out of space. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people want to get into a home. But one of the things that I think is extremely important is that you are very prepared financially to buy a home. So, which means you've saved up your 20% that you're going to put down. You've gotten your debt paid off or paid down and maybe even paid off. And that's the thing, is that what I see is back 10, 15 years ago when people, young adults, are trying to get into a house. Their financials are okay, but they're not as good as they could be. And I think what the mentality that you got to have today, if you are in your 20s and 30s and you really want to buy a house, you got to think it from the standpoint of it's just a big cycle. And the cycle has to run its time. And at one point, things will be to where, through programs, through interest rates being down, to home prices going down, maybe it'll be a good time to buy a house. And the other thing that you got to keep in mind is, we being in the DFW area is so tough on real estate. I mean, it's kind of a permanent, for lack of a better word, permanent floor on prices, because of the supply and demand. So take the extra time that maybe you wouldn't have taken had you been in a situation where you could go ahead and buy a house. And that is, get your budget, get your spending plan ready for it. Put money back, because you always, when you move into a house, there is a tendency to spend way more money than you thought you'd spend. It's almost comical to think that people are going to be strong enough, and maybe they are, but be strong enough to buy a new house, walk into that house, and not start furnishing it with no money in the savings account to do so. So there's nothing wrong with building up a big savings account and get yourself even more ready, even a better, into a better situation. In that way, you're going to look good in front of from a standpoint of a mortgage. What if you could put down 35% instead of 20%? All those decisions will help you down the road. And but once again, the better you look on paper, the easier it is to get qualified, and to get qualified at the best potential rates. And finally, this will not last forever. The situation will clear itself up at one point. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. Another question has come in. How do I get money outside of an IRA to go to my kids after my wife and I have passed away? This is a great question, and it's one that I would encourage everybody to really give some thought to, because this is what estate planning is all about. And it's about the transferal of assets from one generation to the next. One spouse, starts off most of the time one spouse to another spouse, the surviving spouse, then the surviving spouse to the surviving kids after the both parents have passed. And so I think that the general thought is that, well, I don't have a big estate, so therefore I don't really need to do estate planning. But you got to make sure that you understand what estate planning is. It answers the question of, how are you going to get your assets, your bank accounts, your savings accounts, your investment accounts transferred over to you and your siblings, or based on what the will says or whatever, how's that going to happen, and what mechanisms are you going to have in place for that to happen? And there's quite a bit that you can do without spending a fortune at an attorney, or spending a fortune for an attorney to put up trusts in that time. Now, don't get me wrong, and we'll talk about this in a second. Trusts are very important, play an important role as far as estate planning goes. It's just that you don't have to overdo it. That's the one thing for sure. So the listener on this question's asking, everybody's healthy and alive. Something happens to me, and something happens to my wife, then what happens to the assets to my kids? And this is, the first thing that you have to do, and I really do believe this. And we've talked about this from time to time. In fact, I had somebody who created a notebook like this. It was a pretty interesting process. And he came on the program and talked through the different sections. But you, as a parent, I think it's so very important to make sure that your adult kids have very clear idea as to what you have. And some parents don't want to get into that discussion. I get it. It's your preference. Some parents don't want to keep those things private from the kids. Once again, it's your it's your call. Just know that if you do, it's going to make it that much harder on your kids. I mean, I would at least have a lockbox with a set of instructions in it, and this is where you go, this is what you get out in the event something happens to your mom and I, or whatever, whoever's living. But you're looking for an inventory of life insurance, investment accounts, long-term care contracts, annuities, anything that is an investment type property account, and everything that they need to untangle what the financial situation, make sure any debt's paid off, make sure any debt's paid off, and make sure that they know exactly where to go, who to call. Or you could just leave it with your financial advisor. I've got clients who've done that too, and then I sit down and go over it with the kids and the heirs of the inheritance. But the best thing you can do for your kids is to go through that process and make sure that they understand where everything is, because I've seen it both ways, and the other way is not very good. If you're unsure how to transfer, if something were to happen to both of you, bank accounts, ask your banker. Brokerage accounts, ask your financial advisor. And then I mentioned a second ago, trust. When do you really need a trust? If you expect that any fighting could occur at any time, and maybe you're a blended family, kids don't get along so well from each side, there's more than likely going to be some kind of a disagreement during the process of distributing assets from a will, and probably a will being challenged. If you feel like anything like that could happen, then I think it's important to get a trust and set up a trust, because a trust is an ironclad, most of the time, I would assume. But you don't see a lot of attorneys going after trusts because they're private. They don't have to go through probate, and they have to be followed by the letter of the law. And I'm not an attorney, nor am I trying to play one on the radio, by the way. But if you expect any problems, it's not a bad idea to look into a trust. A second marriage, it's probably a good idea to look into a trust. Young kids, when I say young kids, I mean your 30-year-old down, because Just because someone's between 20 and 30 doesn't mean they make good decisions when it comes to getting a lot of money. And maybe you want to put some rules and stipulations on that money. This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.